Howdy! My name is Abby Wimmer, and my presentation is over Dog Training 101. So, approaches to learning. Associative learning is believing or linking two things or occurrences will happen together. Example would be linking a response to a certain stimulus, or linking our actions and their consequences that follow. So, example, the first one is a dog hearing a particular noise before getting fed. The dog will believe that they will always get fed when they hear that noise. My dog Daisy, the one in the corner right there, she always believes when she hears a crinkle of a cheese wrapper that she's always gonna get fed, just because whenever we give her medication, we always feed her cheese with it. So whenever she hears the crinkle of the cheese wrapper, she always thinks she's gonna get fed. Example, the second one would be a dog barking incessantly. It will stop when a positive punishment, such as a shock collar, is applied after multiple occurrences. So our problem is your dog jumps up on people when they visit your home. How do we solve this? Classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is learning with expecting certain events to occur. So when a food dish is placed out, dogs who don't have access to the food at all times, they will believe they'll be fed soon. So the dish becomes an indicator that they will be fed. The dish may have been a neutral stimulus once, possibly when they were a puppy and they didn't know that the food went in the dish, but it changed to a conditioned stimulus when the dog made the association that the food will be placed in the dish. Pavlov's classic experiment with the dog salivation and hearing particular tones before being fed is a great example of classical conditioning. What happened in that experiment is the unconditioned stimulus of the food bowl with food being presented caused the unconditioned response of the dog salivating. And so when a dog heard a neutral stimulus such as a bell being played, the dog would have no salivation because this was before conditioning. But when Pavlov combined the neutral stimulus of the bell and the unconditioned stimulus of the food combined, the response was still the dog would salivate. But after conditioning, the dog started to associate the bell tone with being fed. So when he would hear the bell tone, he would think he would be getting fed. He'd start to salivate. So that's just an example of classical conditioning. Another real-world example is my dog and her response to the front door of our house being open. Daisy has learned that when our front door is open, someone will be visiting our house. Whenever the door is open, she eagerly waits by anticipation for guests to come pet her. So I have a little video of her doing that real quick. So we're in our living room. She noticed that the door is open. Her tail is wagging. She is very excited, and she's waiting by the door. So our door is open, and she's not the kind of dog to wait by the window or a back door looking out. She usually is in her bed. So she knows this door, when it's open, means someone is coming over. And so she sees someone, her tail is wagging. She's super excited because she knows they're going to come pet her. And so she's just very excited to be there, and she knows someone's going to come pet her. So that is an example of classical conditioning. So how do we apply classical conditioning to the problem? In Pavlov's experiment and the general observations of my dog, the responses are related to environmental stimuli. The bell is associated with being fed. The door is associated with people coming. The possible method on how to stop the dogs from jumping is to have guests behave differently towards the dog when they walk in. The reason why dogs are excited by new people is that they know they're going to get loved on. They're going to get the pets, right? And so Daisy does not jump on my grandmother because my grandmother tends to ignore her when she enters our house. My grandma's not really a dog person or an animal person, so she doesn't really interact with Daisy, and Daisy doesn't really interact with her. However, Daisy goes crazy when young children come over. She goes berserk when they come over. She's so excited when they come, and she just wants to be pet by them and loved on them, and she knows they will do that, so she interacts with them more. So a possible way to condition a dog could be to practice different entering methods and seeing if she responds to someone who ignores her differently. So another way to do this, and I believe this is a stronger way, is operant conditioning, which is learning how our actions have consequences that can be good or bad. So good consequence would be a dog doing a trick and receiving a treat. A bad consequence would be a dog peeing in the house and it being put in the garage. Thorndike's law of effect states actions that are encouraged through rewards are more likely to recur than behavior that is punished. So with this, we have positive reinforcement and positive punishment. And so positive reinforcement is anything that will sustain the desired behavior. So this will encourage the dog to have these actions. And so this could be, it's the addition of something. So they could be given treats. Negative reinforcement would be taking away something. It could be taking away the pain, such as if a human had a headache, you would take Tylenol and it takes it away. That negative reinforcement would be, oh, next time I have a headache, I will definitely take Tylenol again. So positive punishment is discouraging a behavior given an adverse stimulus. And that definition is from the book Adverse Stimulus. It is the behavior that is punished, part of the Thorndike's law of effect. And basically an example of that would be spraying a dog with a water bottle when they do wrong, basically telling the dog, don't do that. And so that would be adding to the situation again, adding the water, spraying the dog. A negative punishment example would be taking a toy away from a kid who's having a tantrum in a store. You're taking away the toy out of the situation as a punishment. So a real world example. Dogs that bark incessantly are trained not to do so with positive punishment, such as shock collars. The dog begins to associate that every time they bark, they get shocked in the neck. It's unpleasant, so they start to do it less. Let's say your dog has been recently trained not to bark through operant conditioning, so you as the owner decide it's not necessary to use a shock collar anymore. What will happen? Well, there's a likely chance that your dog will begin to bark more and more, realizing that there's no consequences to their actions. So whether it be with positive reinforcement or positive punishment, you have to follow through with training your dog. Otherwise, they'll forget. So how do we apply operant conditioning to the problem? The most common way to train dogs is through operant conditioning. It can be done with either positive reinforcement or positive punishment. Teaching your dog's commands to sit or stay when people come over and reinforcing them with treats is one way. And a study done by Lewicka, discussed in the Handbook of Applied Dog Behavior and Training, Adaption and Learning, written by Stephen R. Lindsay, dogs respond better to short commands that often have a change in tone compared to lengthier ones with a change in tone. So an example of those commands would be go and no versus go left and go right. If you're training your dog with operant conditioning with positive reinforcement, shorter commands, treats, changes in tones, that's the way to go. Now, if you're doing positive punishment, spraying your dog with a water bottle or using a shock collar when your dog jumps on people, it would be an example of that. The shock collar would be more effective because it is a more painful response. The dog would begin to learn quicker and be able to adapt more with that stimulus compared to the water. So, timing. Timing is crucial for when learning how to teach and train your dog. So, for both types of conditioning, it is very important to be consistent with your training. For classical conditioning to work, the two events that are desired to be linked together must be presented together for a long time before the dog can fully grasp their association. So as we look at the graph, it came from the book Learning to Salivate and the Bell. As we're going through the learning trials here, as you hear more and more repetition, it becomes commonly associated. But when it's just the bell alone and there's no food, the stimulus starts to drop right here. And then it's on the verge of becoming extinct. But it can also come back. You just have to retrain it more. But then again, if it's just the controlled stimulus, it'll go extinct. And so, just for classical conditioning, once the stimulus is not present, the conditioning will become extinct. For operant conditioning, rewards and punishments must be given consistently and immediately after the behavior for good results. If you want a dog to learn how to sit, it's going to be more effective if it sits every time, if you give it a treat every time it does that. Now, if you want to just give them the treats when it sits. When it doesn't sit, don't give them the treats. But if it sits and you don't give it a treat, that doesn't encourage the behavior very well. So, I hope this was helpful. Thank you for your time.